Rand Center UK, and today we have, of course, the Thursday Collective, and a very special announcement with respect to the Thursday Collective. This is the last Thursday Collective, but don't fret, folks. This doesn't mean it's the last collective you're ever going to see. Next week, starting on Monday, the Ayn Rand Center UK is launching a daily version of the Thursday Collective from Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. UK time. The daily objective will adjust and start half an hour earlier at 5:30 p.m. UK time. Okay, for all of you, that means if you thought this was an awesome segment, I personally do. I hope my co-hosts here do. I think they do. That's why they're here. And you're going to get 5 times more of it. And it's going to be 5 times more fun. And you're going to like it, or I'm going to come over to your house personally and make sure you do, whatever that means. So folks, today, the sponsor of today's show is Quent Cordair Fine Art, and he's been making the world an even more beautiful place for 27 years. I know this for a personal fact. I see his art all the time. I even went to visit his gallery in Napa. It is a place of beauty. Now, they specialize in Romantic Realist painting and sculptures. The gallery's collection emphasizes themes which celebrate moments of happiness, joy, and success possible to man on earth. How novel is that, folks? Acquire art you will want to live with. Yes, folks, you do want to live with art. That's why you get it. And visit them online at cordair.com or in their Napa, California, and Jackson, Wyoming locations. The new Ayn Rand portrait and prints have arrived, and you can visit the link in the description and the pinned comment to get yours today. For every print purchased, folks, with the code ARCUK, Quent Cordair Fine Arts will donate 25 smackaroos to the Ayn Rand Center UK. Yes, we make a little something off of that proudly. And if you want art that inspires, if you want art that makes you feel good when you get home, because it brings out your aspirational part of your personality, please get this art. It is amazing. It is beautiful stuff. Quent Cordair is an amazing guy. So let's get on with the topics today. You know, usually we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to all types of crazy things that we confront in the world, current events, and we have a few of them today. I think I'll start with James, since he has a couple right in his hip pocket that he wants to talk about. And tell us what it is that is troubling you today, James, and how we as objectivists can deal with it.
Well, there is a proposed law, and I think it may be the beginning of a trend of laws, at least in more progressive states. And what was I struck by 2 things by this law. It affects the way child protective services can investigate and the jurisdiction that judges have in ordering a protective case. Now, of course, we need child protective services. Physical abuse of children, physical neglect of children is really a legal obligation on the part of parents. Parents can't go around physically abusing their kids, obviously, or depriving them of necessary food, medicine, things of that sort, nor can they be wasted on heroin all night long while they have small children about. That's a form of child abuse and neglect of a physical kind, which of course we as objectivists support. Now, this law, child protective law, normally says that the overall well-being of the child's health and safety are of paramount consideration. And in considering the overall well-being of a child, it's their physical health and safety that has been the focus, and properly so, of opening up a child protective case and giving the court jurisdiction over the child's custody. Well, the modification to the law in this case says that a court can take into account the child's affirmations of its own gender identity as a factor in considering whether or not there is, in effect, a worthy case of child abuse or neglect to open up. And that is to say, it opens up the court's power, the court's jurisdiction, in a vague and non-objective way, mind you, to consider, and I think it's a non-objective law, that was my first, as an objectivist, my first objection, but it opens up in a vague way the jurisdiction of these courts to consider whether or not a parent is allowing the child the child's proper gender affirmation in considering whether the parent is being abusive or neglectful, and opening up a child protect, or even possibly putting them into foster care. Now, obviously, it is vague on the face of it. And it's a subtle case in a couple of ways. In one sense, sure, there are parents who might be super religious and not be sympathetic to a child's actual psychological or maybe even physical issues, which in rare cases there are. I understand that. But when it comes to the moral and psychological development of the child, the government has got to keep out of it. I don't care what it is. If it's some conservative religious person, take the other side. Let's take one of these ultra woke parents who has identified their perfectly physically healthy 2-year-old as the opposite gender. And for the rest of now that would be psychological abuse. But in both instances, whatever the psychological abuse, the state has got to stay the hell out as far as I'm concerned. Yes, yes, yes. And I would consider, frankly, both the religious nut who wouldn't recognize a psychological or physical issue, or our left-wing woke nut who would say their 2-year-old boy is with no physical indications of this is really a female underneath it all. And we've heard about that. Who is it? Charlize Theron recently adopted 2 kids, and as toddlers, she's announced that they're gender fluid and so forth. And that I find disturbing. But that's what the state has got to stay out of. What I would have laws about are the permanent physical alteration of minors. That should always be physical abuse, even if the parent is on board with it. Period. I myself, circumcision is abuse. I'm sorry, but that's my take on it.
I wanted to get a clarification from you, James, and I'm so glad that you're on today, because the way that I read this is called AB 957. So the way that I read this, and for backstory, I was unfortunately involved in the family court system for 6 years. So I do have, again, an unfortunate, firsthand experience with this. But the way that I read this bill is that it's a modification to the family code when determining custody. So as I understand, it's not like, although I guess it would factor into something, but it's not like I could just call CPS and I could call CPS on my neighbor and say they're not affirming their child's gender, and CPS would show up at the door and take the child away. This was my understanding. My understanding is that this law only applies in cases where custody is actually in dispute. So two parents or custodials would go to court and they're arguing over custody of the child, and now the judge is compelled. And that's a really important thing to consider. The judge now is compelled to take into account whether the parents are affirming the gender identity of the child, and that is now considered to be in the best interest of the child, which then could follow subsequently that it is abuse if they're not considering the gender affirmation of their child. Did I read that correctly?
You read it exactly correctly, but I would.
Is that better, James? Is that better? And does that, once the precedent has been set that this subjective metric is a standard by which we measure things now, that it can't help but metastasize out and become an even more insidious law?
Mark, you are, of course, brilliant and right on the issue here. What Jack said is exactly correct. In its direct application, this law would apply to custody disputes between parents or that kind of thing, a custody dispute case. On the other hand, the standard used here, the overall well-being of the child, or what constitutes child abuse, is essentially the same one that they use. So in other words, if one of the two parents, now it's true it's a subtler case in custody cases, which one would have the better situation for the child when it's a custody dispute. But understand, if it's a factor considering the well-being of a child in that context, the same standard will apply in, it seems to me, almost inevitably in all CPS cases. That is to say, the neighbor calling case that Jack's set as a hypothesis, is not yet directly opened up by this law. But what it does do is modify that same concept. What is in the overall well-being of the child? What constitutes potential abuse or neglect of the child? And by opening that door, it does open the door to potentially affecting the entire subject of child custody, whether it's the state involved in that custody dispute or it's just two parents involved in that custody dispute. Does that make sense?
Totally. Hey, Jax, I think this is a perfect fodder for an episode of Black Mirror. So you might want to think about writing a spec script on that.
Yeah,
And
it's very dystopian. You can, I already have my issues with family court in the first place, because once you enter the system, you effectively lose your agency over your child. The everything that the judge does now. Family court's interesting because the standard of law is different. James can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a court of equity. It's not a court of law, meaning that the judge has a prescribed code that he has to follow, the family code, but he's got a lot, or she has a lot of variation in how that code is applied, because it always comes down to what is in the best interest of the child. And up until now, the judge has had a lot of variation, I guess, or a lot of free reign to determine the best interest of the child. But the judge also has to look at abusive situations. And now the judge is required to look at gender identity. And so this sets up such a terrible, combative, argumentative battleground for, just imagine two parents, and we've seen it so many times, and I experienced it myself, parents battling over custody of the child, and then one parent throws in, well, they're not affirming my child's identity, and that child could be 4 years old, and that child is not going to testify in court. They're going to get a family evaluation on it, and let's say that the parents broke up because one parent decided to go like super woke and wanted their child to transition, and is now accusing the other parent of not affirming the identity, which I find this so incredibly dystopian and maddening, and it is taking away any agency that a parent has. I am so glad I'm not having any more children. But I feel horrible for anybody who is going to have children in this existing court system as it is, because I believe that this bill has actually passed and made it into the family code already.
Now, let's bear in mind that this California case is one particular concrete. It might be useful to compare what's going on in other parts of the world. I recently heard that in Australia, there was a law passed whereby parents could actually be fined and or jailed for failing to affirm their child's identity. I did a little bit of digging, and so apparently this pertains to a particular city. It's Victoria, Australia. They've passed this law. And what the law actually says is that if it can be demonstrated that the parents are abusing their child by failing to affirm their gender identity, then there could actually be jail time or a fine. I think it was up to a maximum of $10,000. But the actual criteria whereby it's demonstrated to be abuse is left a little bit vague. And one particular consequence, there was an actual parent, a mother in this Australian city, who wanted to get counseling for her daughter who was struggling with identity and struggling with her gender. And she just wanted to get counseling. She wasn't denying or refusing to affirm her. She just wanted her daughter to see some counselors to get a different perspective. And the counselors that she approached actually declined to help her. They said, no, this is too politicized. Because of this new law, we can't help you. And so they're essentially putting parents in a corner where they can't question, let's take some time, let's discuss this, let's see what our options are. They're trying to force parents into a corner where they have to take, medical or surgical procedures. That's just one particular case where this is happening.
Guys, this is horrifying. Dennis Prager said something on the radio the other day. Yes, I listened to Dennis Prager. 85% of the time I'm screaming at the radio, but 15% of the time he says something intelligent, which is, it seems like the human race is dominated by cowardice. And we have this small portion of society that is highly aggressive and self-righteous in their banner of moral virtue and subjectivism. And nobody, they've made examples out of a couple of people who stood tall at first and attempted to fight them. And because those examples were so vicious, everybody else in the culture is now afraid, and they seem to be going along this irrational tide. And it is leading us to dystopia. Jax, I'm serious about this episode of the Black Mirror. I think you and I should probably write this thing.
Yeah, let's work on that. We'll bring Jennifer.
I know the Black Mirror is mostly about, the dark side of technology and artificial intelligence and consciousness and stuff. But this, that the toxicity of ideas like this and the way they metastasize is a very, very interesting topic that I think.
Well, and it's actually, it's one of the things that art actually has a better chance of having a greater influence on public opinion, because if you can actually show what the consequences are of this kind of a law. I mean, it's all fine and good. People think it's great that we have to affirm the gender, and that's just the family. The judge is just being rational and adhering to what we already know is true. But like take it to not even taking it to its extreme, but just take it to its practical conclusion. Show what that actually looks like, and you're going to have a society where you no longer have any control. Parents no longer have any control of their children or agency, and this is going to be like the Mao era.
And worse, the children themselves will grow up without any control over their own consciousness. They're going to grow up hysterical and filled with fear and rage, which is the natural outcome of somebody who has no moral, philosophical anchor to the real world. Am I wrong? Nicholas, what do you think about that?
No, that makes sense. And to this question of children having no control. So we've all heard stories about in Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany, children being turned against their own parents, informing on or turning against their own parents. That is starting to happen now. One thing I've heard about many cases in Canada and in the United States is where children at school are starting to socially transition. They change their names, they change their pronouns, and the teachers and the students are deliberately not telling the parents about what is going on. So parents are actually being deliberately kept in the dark about the fact that their children are using a different pronoun in school, and then they find out about, they say by chance they find a homework assignment and, oh, why is it that you're using a different name? So it comes out sort of indirectly, and classmates are being actually told by children, don't tell so-and-so's parents that they're using a different pronoun, that they're using a different name. So in general, what Jack said about agency is being taken away from parents on a massive, massive scale, and children are actually being taught to distrust their own parents.
James, do you think it's a right-wing conspiracy that the Department of Justice is weaponized against parents and declaring them a new terrorist group? Is this just something that the right is promoting, or are we actually seeing this with respect to the educational system and the barriers they're placing between parents and children?
Oh, I think absolutely. Jax is right, and Nicholas. The whole thing is that what we have here is a systematic effort on the part of the left to take the control over children away from parents and give it to experts, the government, educators. When it comes to like the reporting laws about physical abuse, absolutely, teachers should report that and stuff. But they scream bloody murder about the ideology of the right being, antediluvian, primordial knuckle draggers. But then they have no awareness of the scientific controversies behind what they themselves are saying. On these kind of issues, they are religious dogmatists who believe they know better than parents, and that parents, in effect, and that all manner of ideological and psychological abuse should be on the table here. Jack said something very, 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 very important. There's a variety.
Oh, it's rare I get so many varies.
Oh, no, 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 no. A judge is allowed to take into account a whole variety of factors, and the weighting of those factors is really an individual matter. And when you appeal the judge's decision, you say, no, the judge screwed up. What you have on appeal, what they look back on is, well, could a reasonable judge, not did they make the right decision, but could a reasonable judge have weighted those factors in such a way? So we're not going to get uniform justice here. As I say, this is a non-objective law. Another thing she said, why I added another when I was doing child abuse cases, real child abuse cases, very frequently, the first question that I would ask is, are the parents going through a separation or divorce? Because, they can go years without any allegation of any abuse allegation. The minute someone files for divorce, one of the parents has made an allegation of child abuse so they can win the child custody case. And this just gives them one more excuse to do that. I would say a great many of the child abuse cases that we simply rejected as baseless came from one parent just trying to gain leverage in one of those kind of cases. It's very, very common. And now foot is in the door for these kind of subjective considerations.
Having this in the actual bill, having this in the actual family code, sets it up so that it sets it up for somebody to win on appeal. Because what I can see is, for the most part, I will say, for the most part, family court judges do try. They do try to look at the best interest of the child, and they do try they call it equitable, but they factor in what's best for the child overall. And so they will fudge some things, and because they have that they have that buffer. Where it's in there, the judge is able to has the right to determine the best interest of the child. But let's say that a judge doesn't like this bill, thinks this is ridiculous. I'm not gonna factor in a 4-year-old wanting to switch genders. The mother here is perfectly reasonable, or the father here, the father here is perfectly reasonable. The mother's a whack job. I'm leaving custody with the father. Well, the mother can then go back and on appeal say, look, this was in the family code. The judge did not take this into consideration, because if it's a hearing, it's on the record. They look at the transcript, and then the judge can be overturned on appeal. And that's scarier.
It is a discretion standard, so there'll be some leeway for these judges, but I absolutely agree with you. There's going to be case law that's generated from this, and the state will decide which way to go on this in a pretty awful way. But it is impossible to be consistent in the application of this law. It is non-objective on its face. It will vary from judge to judge, but you're absolutely right. Simply not taking into consideration the child's affirmation of their gender identity is itself reversible error. They've got to somehow take it into account under this law.
So, Jax, before you read super chats, which I know we have to get to, I want to ask a question before we conclude this particular topic, because it's so ugly, so disgusting, and forebodes a pretty ugly future for us. How can we work our way out of this morass? Does it have to be somebody challenges it, it goes up the ladder to finally the Supreme Court, which can either can strike it down or not? Is that the only way that this law can die a rather ugly death, I hope?
Unfortunately, the Supreme Court that we have now is giving more and more deference to states doing things the way the states like to do it. And this can be good or bad. And conservatives will take a principled stance. Even if we don't like what California and New York are doing, they have the right to set their own standards in child custody cases, unless the Supreme Court has, and I don't think they have, the ideological backbone to make a statement that would make a clear distinction between physical abuse and neglect and moral and psychological development.
I think the only way would demonstrate it's unconstitutional in some respect, which I don't see how they could do that if it falls under the abuse category.
So the only recourse I think people have would be to vote with their feet and leave a state that has these kinds of laws.
Yeah.
Which people are already doing. Okay. Well, this is scary. James, I know you had another topic. Nicholas, do you have a topip? Do you have another topip that you wanted to bring up?
Let's do this. Let's do the super chats, because these are topical super chats.
Correct. Let's do that.
Let me run through those. Adherent Lady of Columbia for $5. And I hope, James, you remember what this context of this is, because it's directed to you. Sorry, James, but Bureaucrat 9 bureaucratic 97537 has determined you and your birthing person with the extra hole can no longer care for taxpayer 584279. Oh, okay. This is like a dystopian statement.
Anthem,
Yeah.
we've reduced to numbers and we've been subjected to the hall of eugenics for purposes. Yeah.
Nice anthem reference. Thank you. Catherine Cassio for 199. This sets a bad precedent. Absolutely. Jonathan Honig, thank you for 99 cents. Sends us a unicorn, which we really need. We need a unicorn right now to fix this stupid bill. Thank you, Jonathan. And then again, adherent of Lady Columbia for $10. Thank you. The only thing that's been good about all this is that parents have become engaged and homeschooling has skyrocketed. James Lindsay has been the star on exposing this stuff. So there is opportunity. That's good. That is true. There's a lot more homeschooling that's going on. And even though
I want to give a shout out to James Lindsay because I recognize that he was a rock star 3-4 years ago. I mean, he was on the front lines of this when he participated in that expose of grievance studies. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. He and Boghossian and Pluckrose wrote fake papers that passed peer-reviewed very esteemed journals in these quote unquote social sciences, gender studies. And some of them were so absurd. One of them was almost a verbatim translation of Mein Kampf, and it got in. And rather than these idiots checking their own premises, they attacked Peter Boghossian, of course, who has more or less had to leave Portland State University and has now started his own, I think, very successful political and philosophical movement. And James Lindsay is doing more damage to these woke people than pretty much anyone out there. He understands this stuff from the bottom, and you can go to his New Discourses site, listen to his podcast. He will read straight from the mouths of the Frankfurt School. So if you can tolerate listening to Herbert Marcuse's essays and papers, he will read them word for word and give commentary, and you can see exactly where this poison is coming from. So shout out to James Lindsay. He's awesome.
Yeah, my favorite.
Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose co-wrote the book Cynical Theories, which is actually a very good book. It was required reading for the CRT course with Nico, so I highly recommend it. Great book.
My favorite essay that they wrote was the aside from the Mein Kampf essay was the dog parks promoting rape culture. Which was that was so doggone funny. And I believe Helen Pluckrose has been sort of pushed off Twitter by toxic woke folks attacking her. She doesn't have the stomach that Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay have, the conflict. Okay, well, I'm going to finish up the super chats real quick. This wasn't a super chat, but because we're sponsored today by the Cordair Fine Art, I wanted to read a quick chat from Linda Cordair, who says, when I was a kid, our parents' smoking was considered a form of child abuse. I do remember that, actually. Today, children are not even getting the chance to become who they are. This is so much worse. Let them grow. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, I could actually make a better argument. Now, I know we'd be getting into the science about secondhand smoke, which has been dubiously reported and used. But on the other hand, there's actually theoretically a sounder argument that smoking in a closed room with a small child is abuse, as opposed to something moral or psychological, which really should be left to the parents.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you could make the argument that campfires are worse. Smoke inhalation. Catherine Cassio for $199, harkening back to the episode that Mark and I and Jennifer, I'll bring her because she will absolutely love to write this as well. Just says Mark and Jax write it. So I guess we're on the hook for this, Mark.
Got to do it. We got to do it. Hey, I'm on strike. Not willing, but I have to be.
Actor, not qua writer, my friend.
Well, technically he could be a qua writer on strike, but if it's under $20,000, as we've learned, then we can keep writing.
And we're writing it
Ashley
for our
Shrug,
own enjoyment. It's for our own enjoyment anyway.
exactly, yeah. Ashley Shrug for $4.99. Does anyone think it's suspicious that sterilizing and destroying future sexual function of children is being pushed so hard? This is beyond insane. Yeah, I mean, what's the difference between what we're doing to our children in terms of giving them operations before the age of 18 and genital mutilation in Muslim countries? What is the difference? I see zero difference.
I'm opposed to circumcising young male babies. If putting permanent tattoos on small children, if that stuff should be unlawful, then chemically or surgically altering a child shouldn't be.
Right.
No, that's insane.
You have to
the
have
consent of the
parents. You can't be in California. You have to be 18 years old to get a tattoo. Even if your parent consents at 15 to get a tattoo, you still can't get a tattoo unless you're 18. But let's just cut out all my genitals and slap some prosthetic on me, and my parents none the wiser, right? When I'm 13 years old. Okay, last on this, and then we'll switch topics. Free trade for 50 SEK. How much of this woke trans stuff is driven by the existence of public schools? Could it survive in laissez-faire capitalism, meaning only private schools?
I mean, I haven't thought about that, and you guys could weigh in, tell me if I'm wrong. I think it is almost entirely perpetuated by the public school system. There's an educational establishment that more or less walks in lockstep with each other. This seems to be the educational fad at the moment, which has the most political pull, and so it's going to be distributed very widely in the public school system. And yes, in a private school system where the parents have control over, their children's attendance and curriculum, this thing would die fast. It would die fast. Now, there would be certain pockets where, true believers would still be able to send their children. But I think that the fact that they would churn out highly neurotic, hypersensitized people who are incapable of going to work because they're so sensitized they can't take the stress would probably eventually, I don't want to say Darwinize them out, or they would eventually sort of fall out of the food chain, but it would definitely prove to be a very practicable phenomenon. So I think it would die in a free market system. What say you guys?
Amen, brother. I said you said it.
I think it would.
One of the disturbing things I've heard, though, recently is the statistic that a large percentage of young people under 35, think that it should be a crime to call a person by the pronoun that they don't prefer. A crime if I mispronoun you. A significant portion, like a third or something, of all those under 35 in the United States. I was perfectly disturbed by that. Even that kind of idea comes from the public schools. I cannot imagine the typical parent, like Mark says, going along with that. And a lot of these ideas, come on, their source, center, and place of work, the fountainhead, if I can perversely use that term, of all this corruption is the education system.
Yeah, but if the parents are now of the mind that parents have to be the friend of their child and have to be compassionate with respect to every feeling they have and indulge every feeling the child has and be less of a guide as opposed to a compatriot, someone who helps them over the rough spots, then you're not going to get parents that resist this, because they're not parents, they're not guides, they don't understand that they're there with a wider context of knowledge to help their child, not fall into these holes. They're actually pushing them into the holes now out of guilt and this desire to know.
Those pockets you talk about would be in some of these progressive, because if you've seen these high-priced progressive schools that some of these elites send their kids to, they're some of the worst propagandists out there. So I think there would be pockets of gender confusion, mostly among the Ivy League educated parents of the elite.
So
can I just say something out of school? I think probably it's quite normal for people growing up and going through adolescence to be gender confused. I think they're trying to figure out where they fit, and it's a complex, I think, universe right? That has lots of variables in it that wind up determining which way you fall on that spectrum of sexuality, so to speak. And so it's not abnormal to go through conflict. It's not abnormal, and it shouldn't be considered that when a kid feels a certain way at a particular time in their life that they're set then for the rest of their life, because they likely aren't. Most aren't.
I will go as far as saying that I think that it's actually, the whole gender affirmation is homophobic, because what could just easily be a child debating over their sexual orientation is now turned into, no, okay, I'm attracted to boys, therefore that must mean that I'm a girl because I'm a boy. Why not just be gay? Like, I don't see anything in the family code that is affirming sexual orientation. Yet again, the gays are getting, downtrodden here. So I'm standing up for gay people all over the world.
As are women. I think the movement couldn't be more misogynistic if it tried. If men wanted to undermine women, they picked the right way to do it: invade every aspect of womanhood and destroy it and take it away from them.
Yes, sir.
Say it again.
We had I think so. Kiana Pellegrino had a super chat. I guess that didn't show up. So she's saying gender shouldn't matter when it comes to determining a child's safety. Yeah, and absolutely. This actually made me think, and this will be the last thing I say on it because I know we want to go on to a different topic. But if this does go up to the Supreme Court, or if it goes up to even the California Supreme Court, I think the only way that it would have a chance of getting reversed is by calling the law itself, or the addition itself, abusive. Abusive in its very nature.
Right. Opening up abuse, making physical abuse lawful in a sense. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Let's draft that. Let's draft that argument, James.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've actually had the California Supreme Court adopt my position. Maybe I'll file an amicus or something on this. Thanks,
Before we move on to the next topic, I just wanted to give a shout out to Kiana Pellegrino. Happy birthday, kid. You're doing great. Keep up the good work.
Happy birthday, Kiana.
There you go. So now I know we have another topic out there. James, I know you have another topic. Nicholas, do you have a topic that you wanted to bring up that was different
I'll
than
defer
James?
to James's topic about Mr. Edwards and the BBC.
James,
There's
you've done your homework, so we're deferring to you.
A little bit at least. There's this amazing story now going around about how social media helped promote and generate basically defamation against one of the leading news presenters in the English-speaking world. This guy was Hugh Edwards, one of the highest paid newsreaders in British television, works for the BBC, and a very highly respected guy. Recently, there was a media leak that said that he had offered to pay up to £17,000 for a 17-year-old to provide lewd information and do something untoward sexually. Now, and it was kind of vague, though, the allegation, but boy, the media ran with it with this leak. Obviously, from a law enforcement standpoint, during investigation, we are under strict rules to keep it quiet until we have the goods. If we're investigating you for a bank robbery, Mark, until we have the proof, we've got to shut up. Both the cops and the prosecutors who are investigating it are under strict rules to keep that highly confidential for obvious reasons. What if it turns out you're innocent? So during pending the investigation, if it's a grand jury, for example, that's doing the investigation, it is a felony for anyone involved in that grand jury to release information, secret information from that grand jury. That's how seriously we take, from the government side, the privacy of pending investigations. Now, of course, when there's a media leak, all rules are off. But in this case, what happened is the alleged victim made a public statement, and I believe I have the exact word, the allegations are rubbish, quote, end quote, from the alleged victim. The law enforcement agencies that were investigating this say, no, there's no pending criminal charge against Mr. Edwards. Now, I understand that's still different.
The victim said that didn't happen. The actual alleged victim said
the alleged victim was interviewed and called the whole thing rubbish.
Wow.
And not only that, they contacted the relevant law enforcement agencies, and the relevant law enforcement agencies say, no, there's no pending criminal charges here. Now, I know that's different from BBC's own internal investigation of their employee, because from what I read, there are other, and again, it's double hearsay, so we don't even know if it's true. I feel bad even about reporting this, but they say there are other allegations where he sexually approached people who worked at BBC. I don't know about that. And the BBC has suspended this guy with pay while the investigation is going on. The real controversy entered when Twitter and child molest and terms for child molester began to trend with this guy on Twitter. And if you do a search on Google, if you do a search at TikTok, it was popping up in news feeds and TikTok, Google, and of course, Elon Musk's now Twitter. And what you would get and the amount of information you would get would really vary depending upon the news sources that you were relying upon in getting this. You'd get the exculpatory, the suggesting he may not be guilty information for one source, but social media would be running with it and running with all these other rumors and poorly based stories. And meanwhile, one of the most respected newsreaders in the world is suspended while this investigation is going on.
When you say, James, when you say there was a media leak, was that from the BBC or was that from competing news agencies?
It is a leak, and therefore we don't quite know who the leak came from. Very often leaks will come from within law enforcement because, you know, media, they'll even just secretaries and janitors at the courthouse or the police station, local media will have spies in there, literally. And that's where media sometimes gets their leaks of stuff that the law enforcement can't make public. Sometimes it's from other media organizations. Sometimes it's people who don't like. You're absolutely right. Just like in those child custody cases, one of the two parents will make up, or because suddenly everything will look like a child abuse case. Yeah, similarly here, even if it's a thin allegation, your competitors might be out there just smearing you. So where does a leak come from? That's always a good question. In the United States, for example, reporters have a source protection law. You can't force them to give up the name of their source, so they can keep that quite secret. It's a matter of First Amendment in the United States. Now, the defamation laws in Great Britain and the United States are significantly different, and I think that Mr. Edwards may have an interesting defamation case on his hands because a lot of what I saw on social media does appear to be a simple assertion that this guy is a child molester, a nonce, you see. I know in North America
nonce. This is the first time I've heard this expression.
It's a very, very old English word, but in most contexts, it means this one thing, this a nonce, right? No. It's become a slur term in Great Britain for child molester.
Oh, okay.
And so if you're just calling Mr. Edwards a nonce, you're in effect accusing him of being a child molester, which is, from what I can see right now, solid defamation, as there's no responsible evidence that suggests he was.
What's been the fallout on his life and his family and his news, like viewership on news? Is that?
Like I say, he's been suspended from being a newsreader on BBC. He used to do their election specials. He used to be one of the most highly respected TV journalists in Britain, and now he's suspended while BBC is doing this investigation. It's astonishing the kind of things that can happen. The real issue here is social media and its responsibility. To think that social media is censoring, and this is, I guess, the point that I would make, to think that social media is censoring by not allowing terms like Edwards nonce to go into the trending status so that it goes into a million news feeds through their algorithm, I think that's perfectly appropriate. It's perfectly appropriate for social media companies to have filters that prevent that kind of defamation from happening. They are a private media organization, and they have to be treated as such. And they have First Amendment rights, and they have a responsibility, it seems to me, to make sure that irresponsible defamation doesn't come out. So if any of our friends on the right want to call that censorship, I would want to point out a case like this, where a totally innocent man, a respected man, may be totally being railroaded with horrible and false allegations. His whole life might be ruined. And you're saying, well, let's have total open let's have Musk's total open Twitter without any editorial guidance or policies. No, I think
I think everybody now becomes a journalist and a content creator on these social media platforms. They can get more views on a piece of fake news that they've promoted than view MSNBC or Fox News on any day or any week. And so is there a mechanism in place where a person who's being defamed to this degree, where their lives are in jeopardy, where their careers are in jeopardy, where they can sue the social media company for not vetting this stuff?
A limited context, and it depends on the country where you're in. In the United States, for example, social media companies are free from legal liability in nearly all cases for what their posters post. So I could post defamation left and right about you, Mark, tomorrow on Facebook or Twitter, and Zuckerberg and Musk would be totally. Now, I have from the outset I opposed that. Now, there are a lot of objectives who say I don't like the legalized suing for money. It's all screwed up, this tort liability system. I agree. Let's reform the tort system, but let's not completely take social media companies off the hook and give them special exemptions for being sued for hurting people. If they are, in fact, agents for hurting people, then they should be on the same civil liability hook that everyone else is. Should the New York Times have a different? See, the New York Times can be sued. If Rittenhouse, that guy, that vigilante guy that night, if he can sue CNN, the Washington Post, and the New York Times for a defamation, why can't he sue Twitter and Facebook? The standards should be the same, it seems to me. Defamation is defamation.
James, you mentioned in passing that the libel and defamation laws are a little bit different in the UK than they are in North America. Actually, you and I talked about this some months ago in connection with the David Irving, Deborah Lipstadt case. So in the UK, it's actually up to the defendant to prove innocence in a case of libel and defamation. Could this actually work to Mr. Edwards' advantage? Like, could he take, say, the BBC to court or some of the other news outlets? And could this actually work in his favor?
I am not an authority on, and I should have done more homework today. I should have been able to tell our British audience, which probably knows better than I do, what the civil liability laws on social media versus other public outlets are. But you're absolutely right. The burden is shifted in a British case. Until quite recently, truth was still no defense whatever in a British defamation case. You could tell the truth and still defame someone, unlike in the United States, which is truth is protected at least under
the truth. Then it's not defamation, right?
But look at this guy. But look at this guy. His whole career depends upon his credibility. He is I understand his salary was more than £400,000 a year. So he's a highly paid newsreader. And think of him losing his job. Now, while he's on suspension, I think he's still being paid. Should he get fired?
Look, and I also have to say, I actually sought defamation proceedings on a few people on social media who were saying and passing along terrible lies about me that had purchase. I mean, this stuff was starting to show up in my professional circles, and it was all lies. And what I found out is, well, I'd have to pay 6 figures in a retainer fee for a lawyer. Once they file, then there's an automatic slap suit. So the person who I'm filing against can automatically get access to all of my social media, all of my private communications, which they could comb through with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's any particle of truth to what the defamers are saying, and then they can countersue me. And in which case, if I can't prove that there was intent to harm me, I not only am stuck with my own legal fees, but I'm stuck paying their legal fees as well. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible world.
All correct. And in fact, it's the normal course of events that the person being sued for defamation normally countersues for defamation. The Amber Heard Johnny Depp suit, for example, is a classic example. That's actually the most common scenario. I sue you for defamation, you countersue me for defamation, just for making the allegation of defamation.
I will say, though, that is the one thing that I still hold on to in this United States when the rest of the law is going to shit, is the very essence of our legal system, which I believe is also the essence of the British legal system, is that the burden of proof is on the person who's making the claim. So in your situation, Mark, unfortunately, the burden of proof is on you to prove the claim of defamation, which means the other person
but the standard is intent, and that is an almost impossible thing to prove in these circumstances, because every single one of these people will claim, my intent wasn't to do this.
Right.
My intent, I was just simply putting out there something that I saw on social media. He said this. I'm allowed to interpret it a certain way.
You, Mark, unfortunately, are in a discriminated against minority under defamation law. If an ordinary person were defamed, he or she could simply say there was negligence. They should have known better. There's a higher level of intent in the United States, the Supreme Court has said under the First Amendment, when it comes to public figures. And this doesn't just mean politicians. This means political pundits, and they've broadened it to include any public figure, including someone like yourself. In fact, all of us here simply appearing in a YouTube podcast might be regarded as public figures because we've put our opinions out there. But Mark, oh yeah, as a reasonably famous actor, you are absolutely a public figure, and you would have to show that the guy who defamed you used actual malice. He knew better, or it was so obvious he really could have, absolutely knew better, and he was doing it out of pure malice.
And that is, it's one person fairly unreasonable high standard. It's almost at the level of beyond reasonable doubt standard.
Just so you know, one person whose argument I use the R word to describe their argument actually thanked me for the ableist slur, and then said they were going to use it against me, and that was 8 years ago, and every once in a while, some douchebag surfaces on social media that says, "You call people this."
What's the R word? I mean, what am I missing, Mark? Are you able to...
It's retarded. I used the word retarded, which was a common thing for Generation Xers to call people who had bad arguments or made stupid comments. But it is now an ableist slur. Now, I apologized for it publicly because there were people that were seriously upset about it, and all of those normal people accepted my apology.
Normal? Now, here you are doing it some more with more hate speech like that word normal. When am I going to get through to you, Mark? You can't be using words like normal.
Another slur.
Adherently challenged.
I think you've cinched your case there, Mark.
Another slur that will haunt me. But the point was, this person was not upset. They were not offended by what I said. They were happy. They were happy because they could use something against me and put it on the internet where it would live in perpetuity to haunt me. That person deliberately defamed me, knowing that that was not my intent in the argument, knowing that I was not expressing a prejudiced or bigoted stance against anybody who's developmentally disabled. They did it with the intent to harm. Now, would a judge understand that and interpret it?
Oh, that strikes me as evidence of malice. Yes, sir. That's evidence of malice.
Then they delete it and it goes away. And unless somebody's archived it, it's really difficult to find. They just decontextualize it and throw it out there.
And you have to prove damages in a defamation case. How did this hurt your career?
Exactly. It hurts it when they call up my promoters for the conventions that I'm working at and say they feel unsafe with me being there.
Right.
And the promoter has to call. And then the promoter has to...
I like your defamation case. I may, if the statute hadn't passed, I might take it myself there, Mark. That's a good one.
Maybe I'll hire you. By the way, I'll be in San Diego this weekend, so you and I are going to get together.
You got to, man. You got to.
We're going to.
So we've got a few more super chats, guys, that we need to get to because we are approaching the top of the hour. Adherent of Lady Columbia for $2 says, thanks for these screwball ideas, Plato, so helpful. Yeah, Plato's responsible for freaking everything bad. Catherine Cassia for $1.99. How is social media different than newspapers / rags? That the very quick answer I can give, but I think that this is probably a topic for like an actual extended conversation right? The quick answer is that newspapers and even the rags like the Inquirer, they are held to journalistic standards, which means they have various requirements and actual objective standards of evidence that they have to meet when they're presenting a story. Social media are private entities. They are, even though they have become kind of de facto avenues of getting news, they're still private entities and they're not registered in any way as journalists.
Wait, I have a question, James, for you. Since Fox News got successfully sued for over $700 million for essentially news commentators who are giving their opinions only, basically attempting to destroy these voter machine products and to impugn the reputation of these folks, they got sued. Could that not fall under, even though everybody's giving an opinion on social media, it could be considered an opinion, and it might have a wider latitude with respect to truth and defamation. Does a case like that open up social media for being sued, for example, for perpetuating?
Social media has a very special law that came into being in the 1990s just for them. And so you'd think, well, social media is like a public posting board, right? But what about letters to the editor, to the newspaper? The newspaper could be sued for those, but Twitter cannot be sued for its postings. Now, I think there should be a different standard, and it should be the subject of a whole show on its own, a discussion. I think there is a difference. And so you'd need to show a different kind of liability on the part of this big public posting board than, say, the newspaper. But on the other hand, they are responsible for the content that they allow to be published to the world. And I don't think that there should be, in effect, two different rules altogether about who can get sued for promoting someone else's defamation. I think the same principles should apply.
Yeah, I would have much more to say about this. I think we should turn this into a topic of its own. I think it's a really fascinating thing to discuss. So let's put that on our little notebook of topics to discuss. I am going to get through the rest of these super chats. Quent Cordair Fine Art for $2. Thank you, Quent Cordair Fine Art, whose ad we are going to be reading again as well, and nicely to sort of end out the subject here. Quent Cordair Fine Art for $5 from Linda Cordair says, it was tempting to file defamation suits when we were being threatened and doxxed when we opened during COVID.
I want to say something about the Cordairs. They are awesome. They are heroic. I mean, they stood in the face of these I'm going to use a big word. It's going to sound like it's hyperbole, but tyrants and authoritarians, and gave them the middle finger. And in essence, even though they were fighting for themselves, gave us all, I think, hope that it could be done. And they did it. They successfully did it. So they are to be admired. And
in the face of death threats, in the face of
being doxxed, in the face of death threats, in the face of whatever the political establishment. What's that?
Law enforcement harassment.
It's great to see people standing up in the face of that. I think we objectivists are unique in our capacity to not only stand up against authoritarianism and irrationalism everywhere in the world, but to do it very coherently and very consistently, better than anyone out there. We are not a member of the tribes, folks. If you want an oasis of reason, come here to the Ayn Rand Center UK, watch the Daily Objective and get your daily dose of reason. It's going to make you happier. It's going to make you see the world much more clearly, and it's going to make you not a dupe. You will be dupeless, as they say. Now, before we go, I think we've gone all the way through this topic, and we're at the top of the hour, so we have to go. But I want to give another shout out to Quent Cordair Fine Arts. They've been making the world an even more beautiful place for 27 years, and they specialize in romantic realist paintings and sculptures. The gallery's collection emphasizes themes which celebrate the moments of happiness, joy, and success possible to man on earth. And after hearing an episode like this, I think we all need a little bit of that fuel. So acquire art that you will want to live with by visiting them online at cordair.com or in their Napa, California and Jackson, Wyoming locations. The new Ayn Rand portrait prints have arrived, and you can visit the link in the description and the pinned comment to get yours today. For every print purchase, folks, with the code ARCUK, Quent Cordair Fine Art will donate $25 to Ayn Rand Center UK. Get your fuel, folks. You need it. So this has been the Thursday Collective, the last Thursday Collective before we go daily. And James, Nicholas, Jax, thanks for being my partners in crime. You always contribute something fantastic to this argument. It's always a joy listening to you. I learn from you. And I can't wait to make this a daily part of our schedule.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, folks.
Great discussion, people.
And always remember, guys, check your premises. Peace.